Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talk It Up Tuesday. So this month is the month of May, and we're in Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm excited to be joined by McKeehan, one of our staff counselors here, to talk about anxiety. But before we get started with our conversation, I'm going to take just a minute to share a little bit about the Turning Point. So at the Turning Point, we're a rape crisis center located here in Plano and in South Dallas, and we serve survivors of sexual violence. Our mission is to provide counseling, education, and advocacy for all of those impacted by sexual violence. We have a crisis hotline that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That number is 1-800-886-7273. Well, welcome, Megan. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yes, me too. Thank you for having me.
So the topic today that we're going to talk about is anxiety. And just before we started talking, I went and Googled. I was like, how common is anxiety? And I saw like 20 to 30% of people will experience some form of anxiety in their lifetime, which is really surprising to me, but also it just shows how common this is that people experience, what a common experience it is. So I wondered if you could start by telling me a little bit about what anxiety is and maybe what it looks like in people.
Yeah, absolutely. So anxiety is classified as like the persistent worry or fear of something. And usually it looks like, I think when we think of anxiety, we always think of like the somatic symptoms that present, which is like trouble breathing, shaking, not being able to concentrate, tightness in our chest, tightness in our body, right? I think the biggest somatic symptom that's connected to anxiety is like struggling to breathe, right? Like the hyperventilation, our chest tightens, airway feels blocked. And some people even equate it to like feeling like they're having a heart attack because the chest hurts and is tight and we're struggling to breathe. But I think that's the more common ways that anxiety is somatic symptoms, but I also think it looks like the persistent of like intrusive, irrational thoughts, right? I definitely think that is a very common presentation of anxiety. What everyone experiences is those intrusive thoughts, irrational thoughts.
Great. So anxiety, we know, is really common among a lot of people, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the intersection of anxiety with sexual violence. Particularly, I know that's the work that we do here at the Turning Point, that you counselors work with survivors all the time. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what that intersection looks like and how it's intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's particularly with the population that we work with, sexual assault, sexual violence, anxiety is number one, like the most common symptom. And if we think about like, the definition, right? Persistent worry or fear after going through sexual assault, sexual violence, this traumatic experience, right? There is a persistent worry and fear that it will happen again, or persistent worry and fear that the person will get away with it, right? There's a lot of persistent worries and fears around this event that we go through. And so anxiety is so common. I mean, I think every one of our clients experience some form of anxiety. I think anxiety is, you could also connect that back to, is very common with trauma, right? In general, because again, when we think about like this persistent worry and fear, when we go through a traumatic event, our entire being, our mind, our body is trying to prevent it from happening again, right? And so there's this worry, persistent worry and fear that it will happen again, right? What if it happens again? How can I stop it from happening? Like just right, all these worries and fears around the event itself. And I think it is, and we connect that with like the intrusive thoughts. So a lot, along with that is the intrusive and irrational thoughts that every single one of our clients experience. And so anxiety is very much intersected with sexual assault trauma because, again, this persistent worry and fear that this event will happen again? Or what if it does happen again? How do I stop it from happening again? And so absolutely, I mean, I think it's like the number one common symptom in our area of work with our population. And to be honest, I'm surprised that number that you said is not higher, because I think more people experience anxiety. They just don't realize they're experiencing anxiety. Because I think anxiety, just like everything, is a spectrum, right? So like I can be a little anxious, I can have a little, or I can be full blown anxious. And I think when we think of anxiety, we commonly think of it as the full blown, right? It's very obvious to the person, to us. But yeah, I definitely think everyone experiences some type of anxiety at some point in their life, honestly, because it's such a common reaction to when we go through struggling events, hard events. That's such a common reaction. And so with our population, with sexual violence, sexual assault, it is absolutely the number one thing. And when we talk to our clients too, that's probably in the top when we talk about like what is impacting daily life after an event like this. That's in the top 5, absolutely always. The persistent worry and fear and the somatic symptoms that causes, and the intrusive, irrational thoughts that cause, which I say intrusive and irrational right now, but in the moment, they're truth, right?
Right.
They're truth. So yes, absolutely.
So it seems like anxiety ultimately is like a physical response to stress. And so the more stressful or more traumatic sometimes the symptoms are, am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And because anxiety is so much somatic, the more stress that we go through, that our body nervous system goes through, right? The higher level of that anxiety, I think, is absolutely. So somebody that has like complex trauma, so, trauma throughout their life versus a single traumatic incident, absolutely, I think has a higher level of anxiety than someone who just experienced an isolated traumatic incident.
Makes a lot of sense. So when we talk about anxiety, you've talked about the somatic symptoms. How does that relate to like the body, to the nervous system in general?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like you said in the symptomatic, or is there more involved?
Yeah, no, so really the somatic symptoms, anxiety, that it is the body and the nervous system. And so our nervous system has 2 states, rest and activation. And just, I don't want to mislead. It's not like an on and off switch. It's a spectrum, right? So I can be like a little on, a little activated, a little relaxed, fully activated, I'm in the middle, right? So with our nervous system, that's a spectrum. It has these states. Anxiety is the activation of our nervous system. So that's why we get the somatic symptoms of the anxiety, right? The chest tightening, the shakiness, right? Sweaty, right? Those types of things, because our nervous system at its state, when it activates, it goes technically for our body, our nervous system, that is survival state. And so all of these things happen in our body somatically in this state, which on the outside looks like the anxiety symptoms, right? And so absolutely, I think anxiety at its core is our nervous system, and the state of our nervous system. And so that's why we have the somatic symptoms, along with like the intrusive thoughts, irrational thoughts that in the moment we think are truth. So it's very much connected. Absolutely. Like you cannot unintertwine the two in any way.
So when you have somebody, a client come in who is struggling with some of these symptoms of anxiety, what's the process look like for either coping with the anxiety, healing with the anxiety, or treating it in general? What are the approaches that looks like? Does it affect, or does it require only counselors, or are there also techniques an individual who may be experiencing low levels of anxiety can also incorporate into their regular life?
No, absolutely. So when we have a client come in who's really struggling with anxiety, um, it kind of takes it back to like our body and nervous system. We always kind of start with the body. Like, what are you feeling in your body um in these states, in these moments? And then we really kind of start to build an awareness on what does my body feel like in this anxious state, and what does my body feel like in a non-anxious state. And to do that, we have to figure out how to come down from an anxious state. So I think the first and foremost thing is what we call regulating techniques. So they regulate our nervous system, right, from being activated to at rest. And we always start building like a regimen, a daily practice, kind of just what you said for people that have low levels, like a daily practice of these regulation tools. And a lot of the things actually are things that people probably do every day. They just don't realize things that make them feel good, feel better. But we always talk about using our body. So anything like walking, stretching, yoga is a great way to regulate our nervous system, come down out of activation, that anxious state. And especially, you want to think about anxiety really is like an excess of energy. So we want to think about things that are going to use energy, but not also like use a lot and create a lot of energy. So when I go on a walk, I may want to take a brisk walk. I don't want to power walk, right? And because if I power walk, what am I doing, right? I'm raising my blood pressure, heart rate, which is just magnifying my anxiety, right? So we want to think about like, we want to bring energy down. So slowing down. So I'm taking like a slow, brisk walk. Yoga, right? Yoga is very slow moving, and you kind of have moments of sitting still. Stretching is a great one if you don't like yoga, because some people just aren't into yoga. So just stretching, just taking a moment to stretch slowly. And again, I think it's about kind of slowing that energy down. One thing we tell clients, the simplest and easiest thing that you can do in a moment if you're feeling anxious in this anxious state, is slow everything down. So if you're doing any task that you're doing, talking, anything, if you can, slow it way down and just do it very slowly. And it kind of goes against, right, that excess energy we get in this anxious state. And so those are really great things. Listening to a meditation on YouTube is a really great thing to regulate. And then another one that a lot of people don't think about is singing. So like singing a song is a great way to kind of bring us down. And you want to think about, again, if I have a high energy and I'm in an anxious state, right? I want to pick a more maybe slow tempo song, a more even song. But also what matters is the type of song, right? So music is very powerful. It influences our state, mood, body, like all that. And so we want to pick things that calmness, content, joy, peace, right? We don't want to put like the saddest song on or the angriest song. So just kind of being conscientious of the type of music you're choosing. And again, the beat or tempo, that's like more slow, even paced. But listening to music, singing, again, great ways to regulate, to kind of bring that energy level down. Another one that I think everyone does every day, we don't think about, is laughing. Laughing is a great way to regulate out of an anxious state. Laughing with somebody else, laughing at a TV show, laughing at a sketch, it really anything, right, that makes us laugh is another really handy one that I think we do every day, but we can use to our benefit as well. And so that's just a few to kind of to get started. The regulation pathway, but there are, lots of other things that we can do too. And I will put more of those things in the handout that is attached.
Okay, great. So you talked a little bit about building a daily regimen that kind of supports all of those things naturally. So in a moment, do you just use that as kind of a toolbox? In a moment, if somebody is highly what was activated and feeling a lot of anxiety, what do you recommend in those moments where it's really intense, even if that person has already been kind of building in these daily approaches? Is there something specific for those intense in the moment experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. I think first and foremost, in those like really intense moments is that we have to recognize that we're having anxiety. That's right. Because, right, if we don't recognize that that is anxiety in that moment, we really just we usually run with it. Right. And so I think when we recognize that we're feeling anxiety in this intense moment, I think the number one thing that we can do in that moment is self-talk. And so it is the idea that my body is activated and is saying, right, untruthful, irrational things. I'm going to say truthful things. So I am safe. I am in control. I am in my autonomy. I am not in the past. Right, whatever the fear, persistent worry is around, saying statements like that to yourself in the moment, truthful safety statements, grounding statements. I'm in my room. I'm safe. I see my clock, and like naming things in your environment, right? So any type of safety grounding statements, I think in those really intense moments can help at least bring it down to a more manageable level. And then from there, you can maybe do a different coping activity, maybe get up and go on a nature walk or put your favorite TV show on, right? But I definitely think self-talk, like just those safety grounding statements and those really intense moments are really helpful.
Great. So maybe you can help me understand this a little better. So it seems like anxiety is a natural physical response to some emotion or experience or trauma. And I just wonder, and maybe this is a language issue, but is it something you actually heal from, or is it something you really just learn to manage and to cope and to kind of move beyond? How do you think of
Yeah,
anxiety?
no, I think that's a great question, honestly. The way I think of anxiety is like a muscle. Usually with anxiety, whether it's because of an isolated event or multiple events, part of the reason that we're in anxiety so much is that the pathways built from our nervous system and the emotional regulation place in our brain has not been worked out, shown, modeled to, right? Everything we learn is through modeling growing up, right? And so if we have never been modeled regulation, then that means that our nervous system has built pathways that basically say, like, we're haywire all the time. We're in an anxious state all the time. And so I definitely think it's possible to quote unquote heal from. What I think it more looks like is we build new pathways and we create a new pathway for our nervous system that isn't in this persistent worry, state, fear because of events that we've gone through that have created these pathways. We build new ones that say, I'm safe, I can regulate myself. So I absolutely think it's possible I think that doesn't mean we'll never experience anxiety again, because I think anxiety is a natural survival technique from sexual assault, a car accident, like right from these events that we experience in life. But we are, because we have built a pathway of regulation, right? The anxiety is much, much less intense, and the amount of effort and time it takes to bring it down is much, much less. So I think that's, and hopefully I said that, I said that right, but I think that's kind of what it looks like to quote unquote heal from, to build new pathways for our nervous system and emotional regulation part in our brain that say, I am safe and I can regulate myself.
Great. That's helpful. That helps me understand a lot when we talk about anxiety and not necessarily, whether you're going to move beyond it, but coping skills and building new pathways is a great way for me to be able to picture it in my mind. So I appreciate you clarifying that.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great question.
Well, is there anything else so I know you're going to send us a resource handout on anxiety and is there anything else you want to say about the topic, or you think that's really important for people to understand about it?
I think the biggest thing about anxiety that I think is most important to me is a lot of people look at anxiety like a personality trait. Well, I'm just an anxious person, right? Or I'm this. And it's not in any way. It is, I think, just being really critical that anxiety and the level in which we experience it and how much we experience it comes directly from the pathways built from our nervous system, all through childhood and the experiences we've had, right? So if we've had more traumatic experiences, if we have, we're not shown how to regulate ourselves, if our nervous system felt chaotic growing up, like all these reasons are why somebody might feel like they live in a more anxious state than others, or more anxious than others, but it has nothing to do with like who we are, character, like a personality or anything like that in any way, shape, or form. So I think like I hear that a lot. So I wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because in a way there's a potential of growth, and it's not something that's an intrinsic part of a person. And sometimes I assume that can be a really huge barrier to healing if you think that, well, this is just the way that I am. But to understand that, no, there are steps and opportunities, and this is something that you can grow with. So I'm glad that you clarified that.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
Megan,
absolutely.
well, thanks so much for joining us on Talk It Up Tuesday for Mental Health Awareness Month. I know that anxiety is a huge topic that so many people experience, especially those that are survivors of sexual assault, sexual violence, and even those probably working in the field as well. So I'm hopefully that people find this information useful, and we're always here as an organization to provide support. We've got our crisis hotline number. So if somebody's in the middle of, of intense anxiety, that's a number that you can always reach out to have somebody to talk to help cope through that moment. And then, we can see about maybe what steps might be necessary in terms of counseling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you guys back next week for Talk It Up Tuesday. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.